Hey guys, tonight we're diving headfirst into one of history's most brutal realities, the medieval battlefield camp. Picture this. It's 4:30 a.m. in 1346, somewhere in the muddy fields of northern France. You're lying on damp straw that smells suspiciously like the previous occupant didn't make it home, wrapped in a threadbare woolen blanket that's somehow both scratchy and soggy. The temperature has dropped just enough that your breath comes out in visible puffs, and you're wondering why you ever thought joining this army was a good idea. Spoiler alert, you probably won't survive what's coming next. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment letting me know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. I love seeing how this content travels around the world while you're all winding down for the night. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first assault on your medieval morning doesn't come from enemy arrows or charging cavalry, it comes from the camp's wake-up call. Somewhere in the pre-dawn darkness, a horn blares with all the subtlety of a fire alarm in a library. It's followed immediately by the clanging of bells, the shouting of sergeants, and the general cacophony of 10,000 men trying to figure out if today is the day they die. You bolt upright, instantly regretting it as your back reminds you that sleeping on the ground for weeks has turned your spine into something resembling a question mark. Around you, the camp is transforming from a relatively peaceful collection of snoring soldiers into absolute pandemonium. Men are stumbling around in various states of undress, searching for armor pieces, weapons, and what passes for breakfast in this medieval nightmare. The smell hits you like a physical force. It's a complex bouquet that would make a sommelier weep. Unwashed bodies, latrine trenches that are far too close to the sleeping areas, horse manure, wood smoke, and the underlying metallic scent of rust and blood that seems to permeate everything in a military camp. You're breathing through your mouth within seconds, but that just means you're tasting it instead of smelling it, which somehow manages to be worse. Your tent matelets call him Geoffrey because every other person in medieval Europe was apparently named Geoffrius, already lacing up his leather boots with the practiced efficiency of someone who's done this dance before. He glances at you with the kind of pitying look usually reserved for stray puppies. First campaign? He asks, though your deer-in-headlights expression has already answered his question. You nod, still trying to process the sensory assault of medieval military life. Geoffrey chuckles, but it's not unkind, right? Well, first lesson. When the horn sounds, you move. Doesn't matter if you're naked, sick, or dead, you move. The sergeants don't care about your beauty sleep, and neither do the French. Speaking of sergeants, you can hear them working their way through the camp like particularly aggressive roosters. Their voices carry over the general din with practiced authority. Up, up, on your feet, you worthless dogs. It's motivational speaking, medieval style. One sergeant, a grizzled veteran with scars mapping his face like poorly planned roadways, kicks at tent poles and sleeping forms with equal enthusiasm. His approach to personnel management would probably violate several modern workplace policies. You struggle into your clothes as if we're being generous with that term. Your outfit consists of a rough woolen tunic that's seen better decades, woolen hose that have holes in places you didn't know hose could develop holes, and leather shoes that were probably stylish around the time your grandfather was born. Everything smells like smoke, sweat, and that particular mustiness that comes from never being properly dry. The hierarchy of the wake-up call becomes apparent as you look around. The knights and men-at-arms in their section of camp are stirring with considerably more dignity. Their servants, yes, they have servants even in the middle of a war zone, are already bustling about, preparing armor and weapons with the reverence usually reserved for religious artifacts. Meanwhile, in your section with the common foot soldiers, it's every man for himself in a contest of who can find their equipment fastest while still half asleep. You attempt to locate your gear, which seemed so well organized when you laid it out the night before. Now it's scattered across the tent like the aftermath of a particularly violent explosion. Your spear is somehow tangled with Jeffrey's crossbow. Your helmet has wandered under someone else's bedroll, and your eating knife, absolutely essential for survival, has vanished completely. This is your first introduction to one of medieval warfare's great truths. Equipment has a magical ability to disappear precisely when you need it most. Jeffrey watches your frantic search with amusement. Looking for this? He holds up your knife, which had somehow migrated to his side of the tent. Pro tip: sleep with your blade. Food, women, and weapons in that order of importance, and never let any of them out of arm's reach. The camp around you is revealing its true scope as the darkness begins to lift. What seemed like a manageable gathering of soldiers in last night's firelight is actually a sprawling temporary city that stretches beyond the horizon. Hundreds of tents, cooking fires, weapon racks, and supply wagons create a maze that would challenge a minotaur. Somewhere in this chaos are the camp followers, the merchants, cooks, washerwomen, and various other enterprising individuals who make their living servicing an army. They're already up and moving because in medieval economics, the early bird doesn't just catch the worm, it catches the soldier's last few coins. The horses are awake too, and they're not happy about it. Destriers, massive war horses that carry knights into battle, are snorting and stamping with barely contained energy. These aren't gentle ponies. They're four-legged weapons trained to bite, kick, and trample on command. Even the regular cavalry horses seem to sense the tension in the air, shifting restlessly and adding their own aromatic contributions to the camp's atmosphere. You've managed to gather most of your equipment, though you're pretty sure the helmet you've retrieved isn't actually yours. It's too big and has a suspicious dark stain on the inside that you're trying not to think about. Jeffrey notices your hesitation. Doesn't matter whose it was. He says pragmatically, previous owner won't be needing it, and dead men don't complain about property theft. The morning light is revealing details that the darkness had mercifully hidden. The ground beneath your feet isn't just mud, it's a complex mixture of mud, spilled food, human waste, and things you can't identify and don't want to. Your boots squelch with each step, and you realize that waterproofing technology is still several centuries away from being invented. Your feet are going to be perpetually wet, cold, and probably developing some interesting fungal companions. A commotion near the command tents catches your attention. A messenger has arrived, his horse lathered with sweat and foam, and he's being rushed directly to the commanders. In the age before radio, telephone, or even reliable mail service, news travels at the speed of horses, and urgent news travels at the speed of horses being ridden nearly to death. Whatever message this courier is carrying, it's important enough to kill a valuable animal delivering it. The implications start to sink in as you watch the medieval military machine grinding to life around you. This isn't a game or a historical reenactment. This is a genuine preparation for violence on an industrial scale. Men are going to die today, possibly including you, and everyone seems to accept this as just another day at the office. The casual way Jeffrey checks the edge on his sword. The methodical way the archers are inspecting their bowstrings. The almost ritualistic way the knights are donning their armor. It all speaks to a world where violent death is not just possible but probable. You're still processing this reality when a sergeant appears beside you with the stealth of a particularly aggressive ninja. "You!" He bellows directly into your ear, causing you to jump and nearly drop your ill-fitting helmet. You look lost. "Boy, first day?" You nod, immediately realizing this might have been a mistake. The sergeant's grin reveals teeth in various stages of decay and absence. "Wonderful. Fresh meat always brightens my day. What's your name?" "Boy?" You stammer out your name, and he nods as if filing it away for future reference. "Right then. Welcome to hell, courtesy of His Majesty's army. My job is to keep you alive long enough to be useful, and your job is to follow orders without thinking. Think you can manage that?" Before you can answer, he's moving on to terrorize the next unfortunate soul. You're beginning to understand that military efficiency in the medieval period operates on a system of organized chaos, held together by shouting, tradition, and the very real threat of violence from your own officers. The sun is finally making a proper appearance, painting the camp in shades of gold and amber that would be beautiful if not for the context. Smoke rises from hundreds of cooking fires, creating a hazy atmosphere that makes everything seem slightly unreal. The sound of metal on metal rings through the air as weapons are sharpened and armor is adjusted. Horses whinny, men curse in at least 3 different languages, and somewhere in the distance, you can hear the rhythmic thudding of war drums. As you stand there taking in this medieval chaos, you notice the intricate social structure playing out around you. Near the pavilions where the nobles sleep, actual pavilions, not the threadbare tents you and Jeffrey Sharesquires are bustling about with the efficiency of a pit crew. These young men, usually from good families learning the art of warfare, handle equipment worth more than your village sees in a year. They're polishing mail hauberks that gleam like silver, oiling leather straps that hold armor together, and checking every rivet and buckle with religious devotion. The contrast between their morning routine and yours is stark. While you're trying to figure out which end of your spear is which, these squires are performing a choreographed dance of military preparation that speaks to years of training and tradition. They know exactly how long it takes to arm a knight, precisely how much oil each piece of equipment needs, and can probably assemble a full suit of armor blindfolded. You hear a distinctive sound that makes your blood run cold, the scraping of whetstones against steel. All around the camp, men are sharpening their weapons with the methodical precision of craftsmen. But these aren't craftsmen theory preparing to kill other human beings, and the casual nature of their preparation is somehow more terrifying than any battle cry could be. The sound creates a background rhythm, like deadly percussion, that underscores everything else happening in the camp. A group of crossbowmen nearby are testing their weapons, and you watch in fascination as they demonstrate the loading process. These aren't the elegant longbows you might imagine from Robin Hood's story. Crossbows are mechanical killers that require significant strength to cock and can punch through armor at impressive distances. The men handling them have the thick shoulders and calloused hands that come from years of working with these weapons, and they treat them with the respect due to any precision instrument of death. Your stomach chooses this moment to remind you that you haven't eaten anything substantial in nearly 12 hours, and the gnawing hunger adds another layer of misery to your morning. Jeffrey notices your obvious discomfort and laughs. "Hungry, are you? Well, you're in for a treat. Medieval army food is legendary and not in a good way. The cooking fires throughout the camp are producing smoke that carries the scent of something that might charitably be called food. Large iron pots hang over flames, tended by camp cooks who look like they've seen better decades. These men, and they are invariably men, because cooking for an army is considered too important to leave to anyone without military experience, stir their concoctions with wooden spoons the size of small oars. As you move closer to investigate breakfast, you pass by the horse lines where the real workhorses of medieval warfare are kept. These aren't the glamorous destriers, those are pampered and protected like the valuable assets they are. These are the pack animals, the riding horses for men-at-arms, and the general utility animals that keep an army moving. They're already being fed and watered by stable hands who started their day even earlier than the soldiers. The efficiency of the operation is actually impressive, once you get past the smell and the noise. Medieval armies might not have had modern logistics, but they understood the basics of moving large numbers of people and keeping them supplied. Wagons are being loaded with equipment. Camp followers are breaking down their temporary shops. And somewhere in the organized chaos, scribes are keeping track of supplies, casualties, and the 1,000 other details that keep a medieval army functioning. You notice that many of the soldiers around you bear the marks of previous campaigns. Scars crisscross exposed arms and faces, telling stories of battles survived and luck that held out long enough to heal. Some men are missing fingers, occupational hazards of medieval combat, while others move with the careful gait of those who've taken serious wounds and lived to fight again. The religious aspect of medieval warfare is on full display as well. Chaplains move through the camp offering blessings and last rites to anyone who wants them, and you'd be surprised how many battle-hardened veterans seek out spiritual preparation before potential combat. Crosses hang around necks, prayers are muttered over weapons, and the general atmosphere carries an undercurrent of fatalism mixed with faith that's distinctly medieval. Geoffrey has finished his own preparations and is watching you with increasing amusement. You know, he says, settling onto a convenient log, watching you experience all this for the first time is like watching someone discover that fairy tales aren't real. Wait until you taste breakfast, that'll really open your eyes. The drummers have found their rhythm now, and the sound carries across the entire camp with hypnotic regularity. It's not just noisy, it's communication, telling everyone from the lowliest foot soldier to the highest noble exactly what phase of preparation they should be in. Medieval armies operated on sound signals because visual communication was limited to whatever you could see through smoke, dust, and chaos. Historians still argue whether these elaborate morning routines actually improved battlefield effectiveness or were simply traditions that armies maintained because tradition itself was a form of discipline. What's certain is that the ritual of preparation served psychological purposes as much as practical ones, giving men time to accept what might be coming while keeping their hands and minds busy with familiar tasks. The camp is fully awake now, transformed from a sleeping city into a military machine preparing for violence. You've survived your first medieval wake-up call, but Geoffrey's knowing smirk suggests that the day's challenges are just beginning. The smell of whatever passes for breakfast is getting stronger, and your empty stomach is about to introduce you to one of medieval warfare's most dreaded enemies' army rations. The queue for breakfast stretches longer than a medieval siege, and you're quickly learning that military hierarchy applies even to getting fed. Knights and their retinues eat first, naturally, followed by sergeants and men-at-arms, then crossbowmen and archers, and finally, if there's anything left, common foot soldiers like yourself. You shuffle forward in a line that moves with all the urgency of continental drift. surrounded by men whose morning breath could probably be weaponized. Jeffrey has procured a wooden bowl from somewhere, and you realize with growing panic that you don't have one. "Don't worry," he says, noting your expression. "You can share mine. Just try not to think too hard about what you're eating, and whatever you do, don't look too closely at it." The cook responsible for your section is a mountain of a man whose apron suggests he's been in several food fights and lost all of them. His ladle, a wooden implement that's seen better centuries, emerges from the pot with what can only generously be described as porridge. It's gray. Not appetizingly gray, ominously gray, like storm clouds or plague symptoms. "What's in it?" you whisper to Jeffrey as the line inches forward. "Oats, if we're lucky," he replies. "Barley if we're not. Sometimes there's bits of meat," though identifying the source animal requires more optimism than most of us possess. He pauses, then adds helpfully, "The black specks are probably peppercorns, but they move sometimes, so there's debate." When your turn arrives, the cook doesn't make eye contact, probably a survival mechanism developed over years of serving this slop to armed men. He plops a generous portion into Jeffrey's bowl, and you get your first close look at medieval military cuisine. The consistency is somewhere between thick soup and thin cement, and it's steaming in a way that suggests it might actually be hot, which is apparently the best you can hope for. You take a tentative bite and immediately understand why medieval soldiers had a reputation for being tough. This isn't food in any recognizable sense, it's nutritional punishment. The texture is grainy and lumpy simultaneously, as if someone had ground up cardboard and mixed it with library paste. The taste is indescribable, which might actually be a mercy. Gets better after the first few spoonfuls. Jeffrey lies cheerfully, shoveling his portion down with the mechanical efficiency of someone who's learned to treat eating as a purely functional necessity. Your taste buds give up, and then it's almost tolerable. Around you, other soldiers are consuming their morning rations with varying degrees of enthusiasm. The veterans eat with grim determination, while newer recruits like yourself are still in the experimental nibbling phase. One poor soul has given up entirely and is staring at his bowl with the expression of someone contemplating a philosophical crisis. The bread situation is somehow even worse. What they're calling bread would be generous, it's more like edible building material. Hardtack, the staple of medieval armies, is designed to last for months without spoiling, which it accomplishes by being essentially indestructible. You tap yours experimentally against the ground, and it produces a sound like knocking on wood. Jeffrey demonstrates the proper technique, dunking it in the porridge until it softens enough to bite without breaking your teeth. "See these little holes?" Jeffrey points to tiny tunnels running through the hardtack. "Weevil highways. The bugs got here first, but don't worry, extra protein." He bites down with a crunch that suggests the previous inhabitants didn't evacuate in time. Medieval armies run on two principles: never waste food, and don't ask too many questions about what food actually is. You examine your own piece of hardtack and discover that Jeffrey isn't joking. Tiny black dots indicate that this bread has indeed become a thriving ecosystem. The weevils aren't just presently established what appears to be a complex transportation network throughout your breakfast. It's like discovering you're about to eat a very small, very crunchy city. The porridge-soaked hardtack is marginally edible, assuming your standards have been adjusted to medieval military levels. It tastes like disappointment with hints of mold, but it's filling in the way that eating sawdust would be filling. Your stomach accepts it grudgingly, probably because it's too shocked to properly reject this assault on your digestive system. A commotion near the officer's mess catches your attention. Even from this distance, you can see that their breakfast looks suspiciously like actual food. There's recognizable meat and bread that hasn't been colonized by insects. The hierarchy of medieval armies extends all the way down to breakfast quality, and you're firmly at the bottom of that particular food chain. Don't stare, Jeffrey advises, noticing your envious gaze. Officers eat well because dead leaders are bad for morale. We eat whatever doesn't kill us because dead foot soldiers are easy to replace. His pragmatic acceptance of this inequality is probably what's kept him alive through multiple campaigns. The water situation is equally grim. Medieval armies understood that water could make you sick, but their solutions were limited. The safest option was weak ale, which everyone drank because the brewing process killed most of the dangerous bacteria. Unfortunately, starting your day with alcohol, even weak alcohol, when you might be fighting for your life in a few hours, has obvious drawbacks. You take a sip from Jeffrey's water skin and immediately regret it. The ale tastes like someone dissolved old bread in pond water, then added just enough alcohol to make the whole mixture suspicious. It's warm, flat, and has an aftertaste that suggests the brewing process involved ingredients you wouldn't want to identify. The French probably have better food, Jeffrey muses, finishing his porridge. That's half the reason we're fighting them professional jealousy over their cooking. He's joking, but given what you're currently experiencing, declaring war over food quality doesn't seem entirely unreasonable. A group of archers nearby are supplementing their official rations with what appears to be dried meat. You watch hopefully until you realize they're gnawing on strips of something that looks like leather and probably tastes worse. One of them notices your interest and offers you a piece with a gap-toothed grin. "Dried horse," he announces proudly. "From my last horse. Couldn't bear to waste good meat." You politely decline, though you're not entirely sure you're making the right choice. In a world where breakfast includes livestock, horses that died of old age probably represent gourmet dining. The archer shrugs and returns to his meal, working the dried meat like medieval chewing gum. The camp's water supply comes from a nearby stream that's seen better days. Upstream from the army's position, you can see the runoff from their own latrine trenches mixing with the water they're drinking downstream. It's a perfect example of medieval military logistics, technically functional, but with built-in health hazards that would make modern safety inspectors weep. Jeffrey notices your growing horror at the sanitation situation. "Look, you can worry about clean water, or you can worry about staying alive in battle," he says philosophically. "Most of us figure if the water doesn't kill us immediately, we'll probably die of something else before the long-term effects matter." The cooking fires throughout the camp are producing their own environmental hazards. Smoke from burning wood mingles with steam from the cooking pots, creating a haze that makes breathing an adventure. Your eyes are watering constantly, and the smoke seems to stick to your clothes and hair, adding another layer to the complex aroma that defines medieval military life. You notice that some soldiers have small personal cooking implements, a knife, maybe a small pot, and are preparing their own supplements to the official rations. These men have clearly learned that survival in a medieval army requires personal initiative when it comes to nutrition. They're roasting nuts, cooking bits of vegetables they foraged, or preparing mysterious concoctions that smell better than anything coming from the main kitchens. The social dynamics of mealtime are revealing themselves as you observe the camp. Men share food based on complex relationships involving mutual debt, regional loyalties, and the kind of bonds that form when you might die beside someone. Groups cluster around shared meals, and the conversation flows between complaints about the food, speculation about the upcoming battle, and the kind of gallows humor that keeps people sane in insane situations. Historians still argue whether medieval armies actually suffered from malnutrition or if the terrible food was offset by the sheer quantity available. But looking around at your fellow soldiers, you can see the effects of campaign life. Many men are thinner than they should be, with the hollow-cheeked look that comes from months of inadequate nutrition. Others show signs of vitamin deficiencies, loose teeth, healing wounds that won't quite heal, and the general worn-down appearance of bodies running on empty. A peculiar medieval food innovation catches your attention. Someone has produced cheese that looks like it could stop an arrow. Medieval cheesemaking created products that were essentially edible rocks, designed to last through long campaigns without refrigeration. The cheese achieves this by being so hard and dry that even bacteria can't survive in it, which raises questions about what it might do to human digestive systems. Geoffrey finishes the last of the porridge and announces, "Right, that's breakfast sorted. Now comes the fun part, getting into armor before the sun turns us all into roasted meat." He stands and stretches, joints popping like small fireworks. Hope you enjoyed your meal, because depending on how today goes, it might be your last one. You look down at Geoffrey's empty bowl, which still contains residual evidence of what you've just consumed. The weevil-riddled hardtack crumbs mixed with gray porridge remnants create a still life that perfectly captures the medieval military dining experience. Your stomach is full, technically speaking, but you're already nostalgic for any meal you've ever complained about in your previous life. The breakfast queue is moving more efficiently now, driven by the urgency of soldiers who need to be armored and ready before the morning advances too far. Men are gulping down their rations and moving quickly to the next phase of preparation, because in medieval warfare, timing isn't just important, it's survival. As you follow Geoffrey away from the cooking fires, you can't help but notice that several soldiers are already showing signs of digestive distress from breakfast. Medieval military medicine understood the connection between army food and stomach problems, but their solutions were limited to herbs that probably made things worse and the general philosophy that a sick soldier was better than a dead soldier. The sun is climbing higher now, and the camp is shifting into its next phase of preparation. You've survived medieval army breakfast, though whether your digestive system will survive the experience remains to be seen. Geoffrey's warning about armor and heat is starting to make sense as you feel the morning temperature rising, and you realize that the day's challenges are about to multiply exponentially. Geoffrey leads you toward a pile of metal that looks like someone emptied a scrap yard onto the ground. "Time to get you suited up," he announces with the enthusiasm of someone about to watch a train wreck. "Let's see. You'll need a hauberk, coif, chausse, gauntlets, and a great helm. Simple, really. Only about 60 pieces. And most of them have to go on in the right order or you'll suffocate." You stare at the collection of iron rings, leather straps, and metal plates with growing dread. This isn't the gleaming armor from storybooks. This is a collection of mismatched pieces that look like they've been through several wars and lost most of them. The mail hauberk alone weighs more than your entire civilian wardrobe, and that's before adding the other essential items that will transform you from a person into a slow-moving metal turtle. First lesson, Geoffrey says, picking up what appears to be a shirt made entirely of interlocked iron rings. Mail armor is basically wearing a fishing net made of metal. It'll stop a sword slash, maybe, but arrows go right through it. and anything heavy will turn you into a very well-protected pancake. He holds up the hauberk, and you can hear your future back problems in the way the mail clinks together. The weight hits you the moment Jeffrey helps you pull the hauberk over your head. 60 pounds of iron rings settle onto your shoulders like a particularly vindictive blanket, and you immediately understand why medieval knights needed help getting dressed. Your knees buckle slightly under the unexpected load, and you have to lock your legs to avoid embarrassing yourself by collapsing. Feel that? Jeffrey asks, watching your struggle with professional interest. That's just the shirt. We've got boots, leg armor, gloves, and a helmet to go. By the time we're done, you'll be carrying more metal than a traveling blacksmith. He's clearly enjoying your discomfort, probably remembering his own first experience with armor. The mail coif comes next a hood of linked rings that's supposed to protect your head and neck. Getting it on requires threading your head through an opening that seems designed for someone with a much smaller skull, and the weight distribution immediately makes your neck muscles scream in protest. The rings catch on your ears, tangle in your hair, and create a claustrophobic feeling that makes you want to tear the whole thing off. Don't fight it, Jeffrey advises as you struggle with the coif. The armor's going to be uncomfortable, that's not a bug. It's a feature. Comfortable armor is armor that's not doing its job. Besides, if you're comfortable, you're probably dead, because comfortable people don't fight hard enough to stay alive. The leg protection chaussees are basically mail stockings that tie to a belt around your waist. Getting them on involves a complex dance of threading, tying, and adjusting that would challenge a professional seamstress. The mail rings pinch skin, catch on cloth, and create pressure points in places you didn't know could have pressure points. Your legs now feel like they're wrapped in metallic sausage casings. Jeffrey demonstrates the proper technique for adjusting mail armor, which apparently involves a lot of pulling, shifting, and hoping everything settles into place before you have to move. The trick is getting the weight distributed evenly. He explains while tugging at various sections of your hauberk. Too much on your shoulders, and you'll be hunched over like an old woman. Too much on your hips, and you'll walk like you've got to stick up your arse. The gauntlets are medieval torture devices disguised as hand protection. They're stiff leather reinforced with metal plates, and getting your fingers into them requires the flexibility of a yoga instructor and the patience of a saint. Once on, they transform your hands into clumsy clubs that can barely grip a weapon, let alone use one effectively. You try to make a fist and discover that fine motor control is now a fond memory. Can't feel anything, can you? Jeffrey observes as you fumble with your gauntlet hands. Medieval armor operates on the principle that feeling is optional, staying alive isn't. You'll learn to swing a sword without being able to feel the handle. Amazing what desperation can teach you. The great helm is the final insult to your human dignity. It's a metal bucket with eye slits, designed by someone who clearly believed that peripheral vision was overrated. Jeffrey helps you lower it over your head, and your world immediately shrinks to whatever you can see through two narrow slits. The helmet is too big, too heavy, and makes every sound echo like you're trapped inside a very small, very hot cave. How's the visibility? Jeffrey asks, his voice muffled by the layers of metal between you and the outside world. What visibility? You reply, turning your entire body to look at him because moving just your head isn't an option anymore. The eye slits provide a narrow tunnel of vision that makes navigating even simple tasks feel like exploring a cave system. Inside the helmet, You're discovering the joys of medieval air conditioning, which is to say, there isn't any. Your breath immediately starts fogging up the inside of the helmet, and the temperature begins climbing toward levels that would make a sauna jealous. Sweat is already beading on your forehead, and you haven't even started moving yet. Right? Let's see how you walk, Jeffrey says with barely concealed amusement. You take a step and nearly fall over as the weight distribution shifts unexpectedly. The male moves like a liquid metal skin, constantly changing how the weight sits on your body. Walking requires a complete relearning of basic motor skills, and running is apparently out of the question entirely. The sound of your movement is another shock. Every step produces a symphony of clanking, rattling, and scraping that would make stealth impossible even if you were naturally sneaky. The male rings rub against each other constantly, creating a metallic whisper that follows your every movement. You sound like a one-man percussion section having a nervous breakdown. Quiet as a church mouse, Jeffrey comments sarcastically as you lumber around the practice area. The French will never hear you coming from 3 counties away. He's watching your attempts at mobility with the critical eye of someone evaluating a particularly clumsy dancing bear. Other soldiers are going through similar armoring rituals throughout the camp, and you're amazed to see how efficiently the experienced warriors don their gear. What takes you and Jeffrey 20 minutes of struggle, they accomplish in 5 minutes of practiced movements. Their squires and servants move with choreographed precision, each knowing exactly which piece goes where and in what order. The contrast between your medieval fashion show and theirs is stark. While you're stumbling around like a drunk robot, they're checking weapon balance, adjusting fit, and preparing for battle with the casual competence of professionals. The armor that's torturing you seems to enhance their movement rather than hinder it, which either means they're superhuman or you're missing something fundamental about how this works. A sergeant approaches to inspect your armoring, and his expression suggests he's seen better attempts at military preparation. Turn around, he orders, and you discover that turning in full armor requires planning several steps in advance. He tugs at various straps, adjusts mail positions, and makes disapproving noises that don't bode well for your survival prospects. "This'll do," he finally announces, though his tone suggests it really won't. Try not to fall over and die before the French get a chance at you. Would be embarrassing for everyone involved. He moves on to terrorize other soldiers, leaving you to contemplate your new existence as a heavily armored liability. The sun is climbing higher, and the temperature inside your armor is beginning to approach volcanic levels. Medieval metallurgy created excellent protection against weapons, but nobody considered the possibility that the armor itself might cook its occupant. You're beginning to understand why so many medieval battles were decided by endurance rather than skill. Whoever could stay conscious inside their armor longest won. Jeffrey helps you practice basic movements. Walking, bending, raising your arms, and attempting to see around obstacles. Each action requires conscious effort and advanced planning. Simple tasks like picking something up from the ground become engineering challenges requiring careful consideration of balance, reach, and the structural limitations of your metal shell. The real fun starts when you try to mount a horse. Jeffrey mentions casually while you struggle to touch your toes. Nothing quite like discovering that your armor won't let you bend enough to reach the stirrups. That's why they invented mounting blocks and why smart knights keep their squires close. Water becomes critically important once you're armored, but drinking it presents new challenges. The helmet makes accessing your mouth difficult, and the gauntlets make handling a water skin nearly impossible. You watch in fascination as experienced soldiers demonstrate the technique, lifting the helmet just enough to access your mouth while maintaining some protection, then quickly lowering it again. The psychological effect of armor is as significant as the physical burden. Enclosed in metal, isolated from normal sensory input, overheating, and struggling with basic movement, you feel less like a warrior and more like a prisoner of your own protective gear. The armor that's supposed to make you invincible instead makes you feel incredibly vulnerable in entirely new ways. Historians still argue whether medieval armor actually improved battlefield survival rates or simply changed the way soldiers died. But experiencing it firsthand, you can understand both sides of the debate. The protection is undeniable. Arrows that would kill an unarmored man might only wound someone in mail, but the cost in mobility, comfort, and basic human functionality is staggering. Around you, the camp is filling with the sounds of an army preparing for battle. Metal rings against metal as thousands of soldiers don their armor, creating a constant background music of preparation. Horses are being saddled, weapons checked, and the general atmosphere is shifting from morning routine to pre-battle tension. Jeffrey has finished his own armoring process and stands before you looking like a professional killer wrapped in iron rings. His movements are fluid despite the armor, and he handles his weapons with casual competence that makes your own clumsy fumbling even more embarrassing. Ready for the next bit? He asks cheerfully. You attempt to nod, forgetting that the helmet makes this gesture both invisible and uncomfortable. What's next? You ask, though you're beginning to suspect you don't want to know the answer. Now we practice not dying. Jeffrey replies with a grin you can hear in his voice. Time to learn which end of your weapons is the dangerous bit, and more importantly, how to avoid having someone else's weapons find your dangerous bits. The sun beats down mercilessly on your metal shell, and you're already feeling like a roast in an oven. The day is getting hotter, your armor is getting heavier, and somewhere out there, the French are probably going through the same medieval torture ritual while planning to kill you specifically. The horn blast that signals the beginning of the march cuts through the morning air like an audio knife, and suddenly your armor-clad waddle needs to become something resembling forward momentum. Around you, 10,000 men begin the complex process of transforming from a static camp into a moving army, and you're about to discover that medieval military logistics make rush-hour traffic look like a well-choreographed ballet. Right? Here we go, Jeffrey announces, shouldering his pack with practiced efficiency. Next stop, somewhere else, assuming we don't die on the way there. He's loaded down with enough equipment to stock a medieval hardware store, weapons, armor repair kit, cooking implements, and personal effects all bundled into a load that would challenge a pack mule. You attempt to lift your own pack and immediately understand why medieval soldiers were built like tree trunks. Everything you need to survive, and that's a generous interpretation of survive, has to be carried on your back. Spare weapons, tools, extra clothing, food, water, rope, and dozens of other essential items combine into a weight that makes your armor feel light by comparison. The pack straps cut into your shoulders through the mail, creating pressure points that will become intimate companions over the coming hours. The weight distribution is all wrong. The pack keeps shifting as you move, and you're already developing a hunchbacked posture that makes you look like a heavily armored question mark. Jeffrey watches your struggles with the patience of someone who's seen this particular disaster many times before. First rule of marching, he says, adjusting your pack straps with painful efficiency, Everything you carry had better be worth its weight, because you're going to curse every ounce before this day is over. Second rule: if you drop something, it's gone forever. Third rule: don't drop anything important. The column begins forming with all the organization of a medieval traffic jam. Thousands of men, horses, wagons, and camp followers need to arrange themselves into a formation that can actually move down roads designed for donkey carts. The shouting starts immediately as sergeants try to impose order on what appears to be controlled chaos, their voices rising above the general din of armor, animals, and human misery. You find yourself somewhere in the middle of the infantry column, surrounded by men who look like they've been through this particular version of hell before. They're settling into their loads with grim resignation, adjusting straps, checking weapons, and preparing for what everyone knows will be a very long, very uncomfortable day. The camaraderie is immediate and necessary, all suffering together, which creates bonds faster than any team-building exercise. The road, and you use that term generously, is basically a dirt track that's seen better centuries. Medieval infrastructure wasn't designed for moving armies, and the passage of previous military units has turned the surface into a moonscape of ruts, holes, and mysterious wet patches that could be puddles or something much worse. Your first step onto this medieval highway immediately demonstrates that ankle twisting is going to be a constant threat. The pace is punishing from the start. Medieval armies moved fast when they needed to, and apparently today they need to. The column stretches for miles in both directions. A snake of humanity and horses that winds across the landscape like a very slow, very dangerous parade. Somewhere ahead, scouts are searching for enemies, obstacles, and the next water source. Somewhere behind, the baggage train is struggling to keep up with loads that would challenge modern vehicles. Within the first mile, you're discovering muscles you didn't know you possessed. The combination of armor weight, pack load, and uneven terrain creates a full-body workout that would kill modern fitness enthusiasts. Your legs are burning, your back is screaming, and your feet are already developing what feel like blisters on top of blisters. Jeffrey notices your increasingly desperate breathing and offers helpful advice. Pace yourself. We've got at least 15 miles to go. The heat is becoming a serious enemy. Medieval campaigns often took place during warmer months when travel was easier, but nobody considered what wearing 60 pounds of metal would feel like under a climbing sun. Inside your armor, you're creating your own personal sauna, and the sweat production is reaching levels that would impress a marathon runner. The salt stings your eyes, soaks into your padding, and makes every piece of equipment slippery and unreliable. Water becomes the most precious commodity in existence, but drinking it presents logistical challenges that would puzzle an engineer. Stopping the entire column so individuals can hydrate isn't an option, so you have to master the art of drinking while walking, in armor, while carrying a crushing load, on uneven terrain. It's like a medieval obstacle course designed by someone with a cruel sense of humor. The column passes through a villager what used to be a village before armies started using the road regularly. The buildings are mostly abandoned, and those few inhabitants who remain watch the passing soldiers with the wary eyes of people who've learned that armies bring nothing but trouble. Children peek from doorways with a mixture of fascination and terror, probably wondering why anyone would voluntarily dress up like iron monsters and march toward violence. Your pack is developing a personality of its own, shifting and bouncing with each step in ways that seem designed to throw off your balance at the worst possible moments. The straps are cutting deeper into your shoulders, and you can feel bruises forming where the weight rests against your body. Medieval padding technology was limited to whatever fabric was available, which means your armor is essentially sitting on your skin with minimal cushioning. The smell of the marching column is becoming another challenge entirely. Thousands of unwashed bodies, sweating in armor, mixed with horse exhaust, leather, and the general aroma of medieval hygiene creates an olfactory experience that would clear modern buildings. You're breathing through your mouth again, but that just means you're tasting the atmosphere instead of smelling it. Jeffrey points out the various types of soldiers in the column, each with their own specialized equipment and movement patterns. Crossbowmen carry their mechanical weapons along with the windlasses needed to cock them additional weight that makes your own load seem almost reasonable. Archers move with the fluid grace of men whose lives depend on their ability to draw a bow, their longbows carried with the reverence due to precision instruments. The knights and men-at-arms are suffering too, though their suffering is more expensive. Their horses carry most of their equipment, but the animals are loaded down like four-legged pack mules. Destriers wear their own armor barding that protects the horse but adds hundreds of pounds to what the animal must carry. The horses are sweating almost as much as their riders, and their breathing is already labored from the combined weight of rider, armor, and equipment. A commotion ahead brings the column to a grinding halt, and you discover that stopping in medieval armor is almost as challenging as moving. The momentum of your pack tries to carry you forward while your legs attempt to stop, creating a brief wrestling match with physics that you nearly lose. Men crash into each other with metallic clangs, and the air fills with creative cursing in multiple languages. The delay turns out to be a broken wagon wheel, a common occurrence that can paralyze an entire army until repairs are made. While you wait, you get to experience one of medieval warfare's great pleasures: standing still in full armor under a rising sun. Without the air movement from walking, the temperature inside your metal shell begins climbing toward levels that would cook food. Jeffrey uses the brake to check your equipment, tightening straps that have loosened and adjusting pieces that have shifted during the march. Armor maintenance is constant, he explains while repositing your sword belt. Everything moves, everything loosens, and everything tries to fall off at the worst possible moment. Smart soldiers check their gear every chance they get. The column includes camp followers, merchants, servants, washerwomen, and various other civilians who make their living serving the army. These non-combatants are struggling with their own loads, often carrying as much as the soldiers but without the benefit of armor or weapons for protection. They're the unsung heroes of medieval warfare, keeping the army supplied, fed, and functional while facing many of the same dangers as the fighting men. Water discipline becomes critical as the day progresses. The column carries limited supplies, and the next reliable water source might be hours away. Men are already rationing their personal supplies, taking small sips instead of the deep drinks their bodies crave. Dehydration in armor is potentially fatal, but running out of water entirely is definitely fatal. The road surface is deteriorating under the passage of thousands of feet, hooves, and wheels. What started as merely awful is becoming actively dangerous as the packed earth turns to mud in some places and dust in others. Your footing becomes increasingly uncertain, and falls in full armor are both embarrassing and potentially injurious. Jetting back up requires assistance and uses energy you can't spare. Historians still argue whether medieval armies actually moved faster than modern infantry, but experiencing the pace firsthand, you understand the brutal efficiency of the system. There are no rest stops, no water breaks, and no consideration for individual comfort. The column moves at whatever pace the commanders deem necessary, and stragglers are left behind to face whatever dangers follow in the army's wake. The psychological pressure of the march is as challenging as the physical demands. You're trapped inside your armor, unable to see clearly, overheating, carrying crushing weight, and surrounded by thousands of other people in the same miserable condition. The combination creates a claustrophobic nightmare that tests mental endurance as much as physical strength. A messenger gallops past the column, his horse lathered with sweat and foam, carrying urgent communications between the scouts ahead and the commanders behind. In the age before radio, these mounted couriers were the nervous system of medieval armies, racing back and forth with information that could mean the difference between victory and massacre. The urgency of his passage suggests that something significant is happening ahead. Your feet are developing problems that would challenge a podiatrist. Medieval boots weren't designed for extended marching in armor, and the combination of weight, heat, and moisture is creating conditions that would be ideal for growing exotic fungi. Every step is becoming an exercise in pain management, and you're still hours away from wherever this march is supposed to end. The sun continues its merciless climb, and inside your armor, you're approaching conditions that would violate multiple workplace safety regulations. The metal is conducting heat like an oven, your padding is soaked with sweat, and you're beginning to understand why medieval battles sometimes ended when armies simply collapsed from exhaustion rather than enemy action. Jeffrey checks on you periodically, monitoring for signs of heat exhaustion or collapse. The trick is to find your rhythm. He advises during one of these welfare checks. Don't fight the march, just become part of it. Think of yourself as a very slow, very heavy river flowing toward the enemy. The column ahead stretches beyond the horizon, and you realize this medieval traffic jam is going to continue for many more hours. You've survived the morning's preparation, endured the armoring process, and now you're discovering that getting to the battle might be more challenging than the battle itself. The column finally lurches to a halt in what optimistically passes for a field, and you discover that choosing a campsite in medieval warfare involves finding the least awful piece of ground within reasonable distance of water and defensible terrain. Your new temporary home is a patch of earth that's been used by armies before you can tell because the grass is gone. The ground is littered with previous occupants' debris, and the smell suggests that medieval sanitation was more of a suggestion than a requirement. Welcome to paradise, Jeffrey announces with his characteristic sarcasm, dropping his pack with a metallic crash that speaks to his exhaustion. Now we get to set up camp, which is exactly as fun as it sounds when you're wearing 60 pounds of metal and your brain is slowly cooking inside a helmet. The hierarchy that governs everything in medieval armies immediately becomes apparent as the camp organization begins. The knights and nobility get the high ground with the best drainage and wind patterns, assuming there are any wind patterns that don't involve carrying the smell of 10,000 unwashed soldiers. The common foot soldiers, including yourself, get whatever flat space remains after the important people have claimed their territories. You attempt to remove your helmet and discover that your hair is now a sodden mess that would challenge modern hair care products. The relief of cool air on your face is so intense it's almost sexual, and you spend several precious moments just breathing air that doesn't taste like your own recycled breath. Jeffrey watches your blissful expression and chuckles. First helmet removal is always special. Enjoy it while it lasts. Setting up your section of camp requires skills that nobody thought to teach you during whatever training you received before joining this medieval disaster. Your tent, and that's being generous with the term, is basically a piece of canvas that's supposed to keep rain off while you sleep. Getting it properly erected involves rope work that would challenge a sailor, stakes that need to be driven into ground that's apparently made of concrete, and a structural engineering understanding that you definitely don't possess. Jeffrey demonstrates the proper technique while you struggle with ropes that seem determined to tangle themselves into impossible knots. Medieval tents aren't meant to be comfortable, he explains, while efficiently creating something that vaguely resembles shelter. They're meant to be quick to set up, quick to tear down, and capable of keeping you slightly less miserable than sleeping completely in the open. The camp around you is revealing its social structure through spatial arrangement. The command tents occupy the center of the camp, surrounded by the pavilions of knights and nobility. These structures are actually impressive, large enough to stand up in, with multiple rooms and furnishings that suggest some people wore in relative comfort. Your own accommodations would make a modern homeless shelter look luxurious by comparison. The pecking order extends to every aspect of camp life, and you're beginning to understand that military rank determines not just who gives orders, but who eats first, who gets the best campsites, who has access to medical care, and who gets to use the latrine facilities that are slightly upwind of the general population. Democracy this is not. Speaking of latrines, the medieval approach to field sanitation would horrify modern public health officials. The camp's toilet facilities consist of trenches dug downhill from the main camp, hopefully downhill, with minimal privacy screening and no consideration for concepts like groundwater contamination or disease prevention. The smell carries across the camp on any breeze, and you're beginning to understand why medieval armies moved frequently. Your first encounter with medieval camp politics happens faster than you expect. A sergeant, not the same one who terrorized you during morning wake-up, approaches your pitiful tent-raising attempts with the expression of someone evaluating a particularly disappointing performance. His interest isn't in helping. It's in establishing where you fit in the complicated social ecosystem that keeps medieval armies functioning. You're new, he observes, watching Jeffrey correct your latest rope disaster. What's your trade? Boy, please tell me you're useful for something besides dying quickly. His tone suggests that dying quickly might actually be your most valuable contribution to the war effort. Farmer, you reply, which is probably the most common background among medieval foot soldiers. The sergeant nods with the resignation of someone who's heard this answer countless times. Farmers make decent soldiers because they're used to hard work and following orders, but they require extensive training in the specialized art of not getting killed by people who are actively trying to kill them. Right? Farmer. Well, farming and fighting have similarities. Both involve tools. Both are dirty work, and both can get you killed if you're careless. He examines your attempt at tent construction with professional skepticism. Jeffrey, make sure this one learns the basics before he gets someone else killed. I don't have time to train fresh meat. The sergeant moves on to terrorize other new arrivals, and Jeffrey explains the intricate social dynamics that govern camp life. Everyone has a place in the hierarchy, he says, while showing you the correct way to secure tent ropes. Knowing your place keeps you alive. Forgetting your place gets you assigned to dangerous duties that have a way of solving the problem permanently. The reality of medieval military class structure becomes apparent as you observe camp activities. Knights don't set up their own camps, their servants and squires handle the manual labor, while the nobility focuses on planning, weapon maintenance, and the kind of strategic thinking that requires literacy and education. The contrast between their comfortable arrangements and your struggle with basic shelter is stark and intentional. Water procurement becomes an immediate priority as the afternoon heat continues punishing anyone wearing metal clothing. The camp's water source is a stream that's probably been contaminated by every army that's used this campsite. But contaminated water is better than no water when you're slowly dehydrating inside an iron shell. The process of filling water skins involves waiting in line, careful rationing, and hoping that whatever microscopic inhabitants are living in the water are less dangerous than dying of thirst. Jeffrey demonstrates proper water discipline: small, frequent sips rather than desperate gulping, saving some for emergencies, and always knowing where the next water source is located. In armor, water is more valuable than gold. He explains while carefully filling his water skin. You can fight without gold, but you can't fight when you're unconscious from heat exhaustion. The camp's smithy is already operational, with blacksmiths working to repair armor damage, sharpen weapons, and maintain the 1,000 metal items that keep a medieval army functional. The forge burns constantly, adding its heat to an already hot day, and the sound of hammer on metal provides a constant background rhythm. These craftsmen are essential to military operations. Armies literally cannot function without constant equipment maintenance. You watch in fascination as a blacksmith repairs a hauberk that's been damaged in previous fighting. The intricate work of replacing broken mail rings, adjusting fit, and maintaining the complex interlocking system that makes mail armor functional requires skills that take years to develop. The smith works with practiced efficiency, but even simple repairs take significant time and resources. The horses require as much attention as the human soldiers, and their care reveals another aspect of medieval military logistics. War horses are incredibly valuable animals. Sedestrier costs more than most people earn in several years, and their health directly impacts the army's combat effectiveness. Horse care involves feeding, watering, grooming, hoof maintenance, and treating injuries that could cripple an army's mobility. Camp followers are setting up their own mini-economy within the larger military structure. Merchants appear with goods that soldiers need: replacement equipment, food supplements, personal items, and services that range from weapon maintenance to entertainment. These entrepreneurs understand that armies are captive markets with specific needs and limited alternatives. The cooking fires are being lit throughout the camp, and the prospect of another medieval culinary experience looms ahead. Camp cooks are preparing evening rations that will probably make breakfast seem appetizing by comparison, using ingredients that have been carried for days in conditions that would violate every modern food safety regulation. The smoke from cooking fires adds another layer to the camp's complex atmosphere. Your tent is finally standing, though calling it standing requires generous interpretation. It's more accurately described as leaning with purpose. And Jeffrey's diplomatic assessment is that it will probably keep most of the rain off most of you most of the time. Medieval engineering standards are apparently different from modern expectations. The camp's defensive preparations are beginning as soldiers establish watch rotations, position sentries, and prepare for the possibility that enemies might attack during the night. Medieval armies slept lightly because surprise attacks were a legitimate tactical option that could destroy an entire force before they could properly respond. Your first night in a military camp is going to involve learning to sleep while armored, and ready to fight at a moment's notice. Historians still argue whether medieval camp life was actually worse than civilian life for most people, but experiencing it firsthand, you can understand why armies had such high desertion rates. The combination of physical hardship, constant danger, terrible food, minimal privacy, and the ever-present threat of violent death creates conditions that would challenge anyone's commitment to military service. Jeffrey is checking his equipment for the third time today, a ritual that's apparently essential to staying alive in medieval warfare. Every strap, buckle, and weapon component gets individual attention, because equipment failure in combat is usually fatal. The enemy will try to kill you, he explains while testing his sword's edge, but bad equipment will definitely kill you. The sun is beginning its descent toward the horizon, and the camp is settling into evening routines that balance the need for rest with the requirements of security. Watch schedules are being established, weapons are being prepared for quick access, and men are making the psychological transition from day's march to night's vigilance. A commotion near the command tents draws attention as messengers arrive with information about enemy movements, local conditions, and strategic developments that will determine tomorrow's activities. In an age without modern communications, armies operated on delayed information and assumptions that could prove fatal if wrong. The tension in the officers' voices suggests that tomorrow might bring the kind of excitement that medieval soldiers preferred to avoid. Your first day as a medieval soldier is ending, but your education in the realities of medieval warfare is just beginning. You've survived the wake-up call, endured the food, struggled with armor, suffered through the march, and established your place in the camp's social hierarchy. Tomorrow promises new challenges that will test everything you think you know about courage, survival, and the true cost of medieval military glory. The scream cuts through the evening air like a blade through parchment, and you realize with sinking dread that someone has just required the services of the camp's medical staff. Jeffrey's expression immediately grows serious as he points toward a cluster of activity near the medical tents. Time for your education in medieval healthcare, he says grimly. Hope you've got a strong stomach, because what you're about to see will test it. The medical area of a medieval camp would make modern emergency rooms look like luxury spas. The surgeon, and using that term generously, is a man whose qualifications include basic literacy, some experience with sharp instruments, and the kind of pragmatic approach to human anatomy that comes from treating battlefield injuries without anesthesia, antibiotics, or any real understanding of infection control. You approach the medical tent with the morbid fascination of someone watching a particularly gruesome accident. Inside, a soldier is receiving treatment for what appears to be a sword wound to his leg, and the procedure involves techniques that would be considered torture in any modern context. The patient is being held down by 3 other men while the surgeon works with instruments that look like they were borrowed from a torture chamber. No screaming during surgery, Jeffrey whispers as you watch the medieval medical show. The surgeons don't like it when patients make noise distracts them from their work. Besides, if you're screaming, you're still alive, which means the treatment is working. His attempt at humor doesn't quite mask the genuine horror of watching medieval medicine in action. The surgical instruments are basically torture devices with medical pretensions. Saws for amputating limbs, knives for cutting flesh, needles for sewing wounds, and cauterizing irons for sealing bleeding vessels, all of them designed more for efficiency than patient comfort. The surgeon wields these tools with the casual competence of someone who's learned that quick work saves more lives than gentle technique. Medieval understanding of anatomy was limited to what could be observed during battlefield treatment, and much of their knowledge came from veterinary medicine, the theory being that human and animal bodies were similar enough that horse doctoring could be adapted for human use. This approach worked surprisingly often, though the patients who survived probably wished they hadn't. The concept of sterilization is still several centuries away from being invented, so the surgeon's instruments are cleaned by wiping them on a cloth that's seen better days. Cross-contamination isn't just possible, it's inevitable, and the concept that dirty instruments might spread disease is as foreign as the idea of traveling to the moon. What doesn't kill you immediately will probably kill you slowly. A camp barber is working nearby, and medieval barbers did double duty as surgeons because they already owned sharp instruments and weren't squeamish about cutting into human flesh. This particular practitioner is performing what appears to be dental work on a soldier whose face suggests he's reconsidering his life choices. Medieval dentistry made modern root canals seem like relaxing spa treatments. See that fellow getting his tooth pulled? Jeffrey points to the dental patient, whose muffled screams are adding to the medical tense atmosphere. No painkillers except maybe some strong ale, and the technique involves grabbing the tooth with pliers and pulling until something gives way. Sometimes it's the tooth, sometimes it's the jaw, sometimes it's the patient's will to live. The medical supplies consist of whatever the army could carry, supplemented by local plants that might or might not have medicinal properties. Herbal remedies are based on folk wisdom, superstition, and the occasional lucky guess. But when modern pharmaceuticals don't exist, even questionable plant extracts are better than nothing. The success rate is probably lower than prayer, but desperate people try desperate remedies. Bloodletting is being performed on a patient who looks like he's already lost too much blood. But medieval medicine believed that removing more blood would restore the body's natural balance. The technique involves making cuts in strategic locations and allowing blood to drain into bowls, continuing until the patient either recovers or faints from blood loss. The theory behind this treatment is creative, even if the results are usually counterproductive. A soldier with an infected wound is receiving treatment that involves pouring boiling oil directly onto the affected area. The patient's reaction suggests this is exactly as pleasant as it sounds. But medieval doctors believed that extreme heat would kill whatever evil influences were causing the infection. They weren't entirely wrong about heat killing bacteria, though their application methods left room for improvement. The medical tense aroma combines the sense of blood, infected wounds, herbal concoctions, and human suffering into a bouquet that would challenge even medieval noses. You're breathing through your mouth again, but the taste is somehow worse than the smell. Jeffrey notices your growing paleness and offers practical advice. If you're going to vomit, aim away from the patients. The surgeons get annoyed when people add to their cleanup workload. Medieval understanding of pain management was limited to alcohol, opium derivatives when available, and the kind of stoic acceptance that came from knowing that complaining wouldn't improve anything. Patients learned to endure procedures that would require general anesthesia in modern times, developing pain tolerance that would impress modern athletes. A camp chaplain is moving through the medical area, offering last rites to patients whose conditions suggest they won't be needing medical care much longer. Medieval medicine and religion worked closely together, partly because spiritual comfort was often the only effective treatment available. The chaplain's presence indicates that some medical procedures had mortality rates approaching certainty. You watch in fascination as a surgeon attempts to remove an arrowhead from a patient's shoulder using a technique that involves cutting a larger hole to access the embedded point. The procedure requires holding the patient down while creating additional trauma to reach the original injury, and the patient's responses suggest he's questioning whether the cure might be worse than the wound. Medieval medical texts recommended treatments that ranged from practical to magical, including applications of various animal parts, astronomical timing for procedures, and dietary restrictions that were based more on tradition than science. The surgeons working in this tent are probably using techniques passed down through generations of practitioners who learned by trial and error, mostly error. A patient with a broken leg is having the bone set using splints made from available wood and cloth bindings that will either heal properly or create permanent disability. Medieval orthopedics was basically carpentry applied to human bones, and the results depended more on luck than skill. The patient is conscious throughout the procedure, offering colorful commentary on the surgeon's ancestry and professional competence. Jeffrey explains the camp's medical hierarchy while you watch the various treatments proceeding. The knights get the best medical care because they're expensive to replace. The common soldiers get whatever's left over after the important people are treated. The camp followers and servants get prayers and herbal tea, assuming anyone remembers they exist. Historians still argue whether medieval battlefield medicine actually saved more lives than it killed, but watching the procedures firsthand, you can understand both sides of the debate. Some treatments were genuinely helpful, cleaning wounds, setting bones, removing foreign objects, while others were actively harmful but performed with the best intentions based on limited understanding. The medical tent also serves as the camp's pharmacy, with various concoctions brewing in pots that bubble with suspicious activity. Medieval chemistry was part science, part alchemy, and part wishful thinking, creating remedies that might cure disease, cause poisoning, or simply taste terrible without affecting anything. The pharmacist, usually the surgeon's assistant, mixed compounds based on recipes that were often more hope than science. A soldier is receiving treatment for what appears to be dysentery, the medieval army's most reliable killer. The treatment involves dietary restrictions, herbal remedies, and prayers, because medieval medicine didn't understand bacterial infections or the importance of sanitation in preventing disease spread. More soldiers died from disease than combat, making the medical tent one of the most dangerous places in camp. The surgical procedures continue with medieval efficiency: quick, brutal, and focused on immediate survival rather than long-term recovery. Patients who survived the initial treatment faced weeks of healing without proper pain management, infection control, or nutritional support. Recovery was more about personal constitution than medical care. A patient with head trauma is being treated using techniques that involve examining the wound, cleaning out debris, and hoping for the best. Medieval understanding of brain injuries was limited to external observation, and treatments ranged from practical wound care to mystical interventions that probably made things worse. The patient's survival chances depended more on the severity of the original injury than the quality of treatment. You notice that many of the medical staff bear the scars of their own battlefield experiences, suggesting that medieval surgeons learned their trade through personal exposure to violence rather than formal education. Their techniques showed the practical efficiency of people who understood that perfect results were less important than keeping patients alive long enough to heal naturally. The camp's medical supplies are constantly being depleted and replaced, creating a logistical challenge that required careful planning and local sourcing. Armies carried basic medical equipment, but extended campaigns required finding local sources for everything from bandages to medicinal plants. The medical tent's inventory represented a complex supply chain that stretched back to the army's origin point. As evening settles over the camp, the medical tent's activities continue by torchlight because battlefield injuries don't wait for convenient timing. The combination of firelight, medical procedures, and patient responses creates a scene that would challenge medieval painters looking for realistic depictions of human suffering. Jeffrey concludes your medical education with characteristic pragmatism. The goal isn't to avoid getting hurt. That's impossible in warfare. The goal is to avoid getting hurt so badly that even medieval medicine can't patch you up enough to fight again. He checks his own weapons and armor with renewed attention, probably motivated by what you've both just witnessed. The trumpets sound just before dawn, their metallic voices cutting through the morning mist like harbingers of doom. And you realize with creeping terror that today is the day you're supposed to learn how to kill people who are actively trying to kill you first. Around the camp, the atmosphere has shifted from the routine misery of medieval military life to the focused tension of an army preparing for actual combat. And your stomach responds to this development by attempting to relocate itself somewhere around your throat. Jeffrey emerges from your shared tent looking like a man who's done this dance before, his movements efficient and purposeful as he checks his equipment one final time. Right then, he announces with the cheerful tone of someone discussing the weather, "Time to learn the fine art of not dying horribly. The enemy's been spotted about 2 miles east, which means we've got maybe an hour to turn you from a farmer into something resembling a soldier." You attempt to don your armor with hands that shake like autumn leaves, and every piece of equipment feels heavier and more cumbersome than it did yesterday. The hauberk settles onto your shoulders like a metallic death shroud. The helmet transforms your vision into a narrow tunnel of impending doom, and your weapons feel about as familiar as exotic surgical instruments. Jeffrey watches your fumbling preparations with the patient expression of someone who's witnessed many first-time warriors confronting their mortality. First lesson in battlefield survival, Jeffrey says while checking the edge on his sword. Forget everything you think you know about fighting. This isn't a tavern brawl or settling disputes with your neighbors. This is organized murder on an industrial scale, and the people trying to kill you have been practicing longer than you have. His casual delivery of this information somehow makes it more terrifying than if he'd been dramatic about it. The weapons training area has been hastily established in a patch of ground that's been trampled flat by thousands of nervous feet, and you join a group of similarly terrified new recruits who are about to receive crash courses in medieval combat techniques. The instructor is a grizzled veteran whose collection of scars suggests he's survived enough battles to qualify as an expert, assuming expertise is measured by the ability to avoid dying while other people try to kill you. "This is a sword," the instructor announces, holding up a weapon that gleams with recently sharpened menace. The pointy end goes into the other fellow, preferably somewhere vital. The blunt end stays in your hand, unless you're having a very bad day. His teaching method combines practical demonstration with the kind of gallows humor that keeps people sane when discussing the technicalities of homicide. Your first attempt to hold a sword properly reveals that medieval weapons were designed by people who understood that warfare wasn't about finesse, was about applying sharp metal to human flesh with sufficient force to produce decisive results. The sword is heavier than you expected. The balance feels wrong in your gauntlet hands, and swinging it with any accuracy requires muscles you haven't developed and coordination you don't possess. Stop thinking of it as a sword, the instructor advises as you struggle with basic movements. Think of it as a very expensive, very sharp club. Your job isn't to fence like a gentleman, it's to hit the enemy harder and more often than he hits you. Elegance is for people who aren't trying to survive. He demonstrates a series of basic attacks that prioritize power over precision, efficiency over artistry. The spear training is equally enlightening and equally terrifying. Medieval warfare was dominated by pole weapons because they allowed relatively untrained soldiers to contribute meaningfully to combat without requiring years of specialized training. Your spear is essentially a sharp metal point attached to a long wooden handle, and the technique involves pointing it at enemies and hoping they run into it before they can get close enough to use their own weapons on you. Spears are democracy in action. The instructor explains while showing you the proper grip and stance. Doesn't matter if you're a farmer or a knight, everyone dies the same way when they've got 6 feet of steel in their belly. The trick is keeping the pointy end between you and them, and remembering that the fellow next to you is trying to do the same thing. He makes it sound simple, but watching the other recruits struggle with basic spear work suggests that simple and easy are different concepts. The shield work proves to be its own specialized skill that requires learning to see battlefield dynamics through a narrow window while managing a piece of equipment that's supposed to keep you alive but feels more likely to get you killed. Medieval shields were heavy, awkward, and absolutely essential for survival, but using one effectively required developing instincts that took years to perfect and muscle memory that you definitely don't have. Your shield isn't just protection. The instructor demonstrates while deflecting imaginary attacks. It's a weapon, a tool, and your best friend all wrapped up in wood and metal. Learn to see around it, fight with it, and never, ever let go of it, because the moment you drop your shield is probably the moment you die. His shield work is fluid and natural, making your own clumsy attempts look like someone trying to dance while carrying furniture. Crossbow training reveals that medieval missile weapons were essentially point-and-shoot devices that could punch through armor at impressive ranges. But loading them under battlefield conditions required the kind of calm precision that seems impossible when people are actively trying to kill you. The crossbow mechanism is ingenious but slow, meaning you get one shot before enemies close to melee range, and that shot had better count. Crossbows are the great equalizer. The instructor explains while demonstrating the loading process. Doesn't take years of training like a longbow, doesn't require superhuman strength, and it'll kill a knight just as dead as it'll kill a peasant. But it's also slow, complicated, and useless in close combat, so make your shot count and have a backup plan ready. The backup plan apparently involves hoping your melee weapons work better than your archery skills. The formation fighting instruction is where medieval warfare's true brutality becomes apparent. Individual combat skills matter less than your ability to work as part of a unit that moves, fights, and dies together. The techniques involve maintaining formation integrity, supporting your neighbors, and accepting that your survival depends more on collective discipline than personal heroics. Formations keep you alive, the instructor emphasizes while arranging recruits into rough battle lines. Individual warriors are dead warriors, because warfare isn't about single combat, it's about groups of people trying to kill other groups of people more efficiently than they're being killed in return. Stay with your unit, follow orders, and remember that the man next to you is the most important person in your world. You practice basic maneuvers that involve moving in formation while maintaining weapon readiness, and the coordination required is staggering. Every step has to be synchronized. Every weapon angle has to complement your neighbor's positions, and every movement has to account for the fact that enemies will be trying to disrupt your formation while you're trying to maintain it. Medieval warfare was less about individual skill and more about collective choreography performed under lethal pressure. The psychological preparation is as important as the physical training, and the instructor spends considerable time explaining what combat actually feels like for people who haven't experienced organized violence. Your body will try to run. He warns the assembled recruits. Your mind will try to panic. Your weapons will feel foreign, and everything you've learned will seem to disappear. This is normal. The trick is functioning despite the terror, not eliminating it. Horse combat training is offered for those who might find themselves mounted during battle, and watching knights practice their techniques reveals why heavy cavalry dominated medieval battlefields. The coordination required to control a war horse while wielding weapons and maintaining armor is superhuman, and the impact of mounted warriors charging infantry formations could break armies through sheer psychological pressure. The archery demonstration showcases longbow techniques that require years to develop and physical conditioning that transforms the human body into a specialized weapon delivery system. English longbowmen could accurately place arrows at distances that modern rifles would respect, but their skills came from starting training in childhood and practicing daily for decades. You get to try drawing a war bow and discover that your maximum effort barely moves the string. Jeffrey watches your training with the critical eye of someone evaluating your survival prospects, and his expression suggests the odds aren't favorable. The good news he offers during a break in the instruction is that most of your enemies are just as unprepared as you are. The bad news is that some of them have been doing this for years, and those are the ones who'll kill you if you're not careful. Historians still argue whether medieval battle training actually prepared soldiers for combat or simply gave them false confidence before throwing them into lethal situations. But experiencing the instruction firsthand, you can see both perspectives. The techniques are practical and proven, but mastering them requires time and experience that new recruits simply don't have. The weapons maintenance instruction reveals that keeping your equipment functional is as important as knowing how to use it, because weapons fail at the worst possible moments and armor develops problems that can be fatal if not addressed. Medieval warfare required soldiers to be blacksmiths, mechanics, and warriors simultaneously, maintaining complex equipment under field conditions with limited resources. As the training session concludes, messengers arrive with reports that the enemy is advancing faster than expected, which means your crash course in medieval combat is about to be tested under actual battlefield conditions. The instructor's final advice is characteristically practical. Remember what you've learned, stay with your unit, follow orders, and try not to die in any obviously stupid ways. Good luck, and may God have mercy on your souls, because the enemy certainly won't. You gather your weapons and prepare to join the formation that will march toward whatever fate awaits on the battlefield, knowing that your medieval military education is about to receive its final, most decisive examination. Jeffrey checks your equipment one last time, adjusts your grip on your spear, and offers his own parting wisdom. Just remember, everyone's scared, everyone's confused, and everyone wants to go home. The trick is staying alive long enough to actually get there. The battle horn's final, decisive blast cuts through the morning air like the sound of destiny clearing its throat, and suddenly your crash course in medieval warfare is about to receive its ultimate examination. Around you, 10,000 men are transforming from a collection of individuals into a killing machine with you somewhere in its digestive system, and your bowels are responding to this development with the kind of urgent commentary that medieval warriors probably experienced but rarely discussed in polite company. Jeffrey checks your spear grip one final time, his experienced hands adjusting your stance with the efficiency of someone who's seen too many new soldiers die from preventable mistakes. Right then, he says with forced cheerfulness, "Time to see if all that training stuck, or if you're about to become a very expensive casualty statistic. Try to stay close, follow my lead, and for the love of all that's holy, don't drop your spear." The formation begins moving forward with the inexorable momentum of a very slow, very deadly avalanche, and you discover that marching toward people who want to kill you feels fundamentally different from marching toward a campsite. Every step carries you closer to violence that will be personal, immediate, and potentially fatal, and your mind keeps helpfully reminding you that retreat is no longer an option because medieval armies shoot deserters as efficiently as they fight enemies. Your position in the formation places you in the second rank of spearmen, which Geoffrey explains is simultaneously good news and bad news. Good news: you're not in the front rank, so you won't be the first to die. Bad news: you're close enough to see everything that happens to the poor bastards in front of you, and if they fall, you get promoted to first rank whether you want the job or not. The enemy becomes visible across the field as a dark mass that resolves into individual shapes as the distance closes, and you realize with growing horror that these aren't abstract opponents from training scenarios theory, actual human beings who've spent the morning going through their own preparations for killing you specifically. Their armor glints in the sunlight, their weapons are clearly visible, and their formations suggest they know what they're doing considerably better than you do. The psychological pressure of approaching combat is unlike anything your civilian life prepared you for. Your heart is beating loud enough that you're sure the enemy can hear it. Your mouth has gone completely dry despite the morning's water ration, and your hands are shaking so badly that maintaining your grip on weapons requires conscious effort. Geoffrey notices your deteriorating condition and offers practical advice. Breathe. In. Repeat. Dead men can't fight, but neither can men who pass out from forgetting how breathing works. The archers begin their deadly work when the formation's close to within longbow range, and watching medieval missile combat from the receiving end provides educational insights that no training could simulate. Arrows fall like lethal rain, creating a sound like deadly hail against shields and armor, and the screams that rise from both formations indicate that some of these projectiles are finding their intended targets with devastating efficiency. You crouch behind your shield as arrows whistle overhead, and the impact of those that strike your protection sends shock waves up your arm that make your teeth rattle. Medieval archery wasn't the romantic, elegant affair of Storysit was industrial-scale death delivery designed to break formations before melee combat began, and experiencing it firsthand makes you understand why armies invested so heavily in shield technology. The cavalry charge begins on the army's flanks, and watching heavy horses accelerate toward human targets while carrying armored knights is like witnessing natural disasters in real time. The sound of hoofbeats builds to a thunder that you can feel in your chest, and the psychological impact of mounted warriors charging infantry is designed to break men's minds before the physical impact breaks their bodies. Geoffrey grabs your arm as the formation's close to melee range, his grip tight enough to leave bruises through your mail. Here we go. He shouts over the growing noise of 10,000 men preparing to kill each other. Stay low. Keep your spear point forward. And remember, the man in front of you wants to go home to his family just as much as you do. Don't let him. The actual moment of contact between opposing formations is chaos beyond description, as if someone had weaponized noise, confusion, and terror, then compressed it all into a space barely large enough to contain the violence. Spears clash against shields, swords ring against armor, and men scream in languages you don't recognize while trying to push sharp metal through whatever protection their enemies possess. Your first attempt at actual combat involves thrusting your spear toward a face that appears in the enemy formation, and the resistance you feel when the point connects with something solid sends shock waves up the weapon's shaft that you feel in your shoulders. Whether you've wounded, killed, or merely annoyed your target is impossible to determine in the chaos, but the face disappears, which you choose to interpret as success. The noise of medieval battle is a sensory assault that would challenge modern sound equipment. Metal rings against metal. Men shout orders that can't be heard over the general din. Wounded soldiers scream with the kind of volume that suggests serious injury. And underneath it all is the constant shuffle clang of armored men trying to maintain footing on ground that's rapidly becoming treacherous with blood and worse. Your shield takes a blow that feels like being hit by a flying anvil, and the impact drives you backward into the man behind you, who responds with colorful commentary about your ancestry and fighting ability. Medieval shield work requires absorbing impacts that would hospitalize modern athletes, then immediately returning to combat readiness because the alternative is death from the next attack that you're too stunned to block. The smell of battle is another assault on your already overwhelmed senses. Blood has a metallic scent that mingles with the earthy smell of disturbed ground, the acrid smoke from various fires, and the unfortunately familiar aroma of men who've lost control of their bodily functions under extreme stress. Medieval battles were aromatic experiences that lingered in participants' memories long after the physical wounds healed. Geoffrey disappears momentarily in the press of combat, and you experience the pure terror of being alone in a medieval battle surrounded by people who want to kill you while you're not entirely sure which direction your own army is facing. The confusion is absolute. You can't see beyond the next few fighters. You can't hear commands over the noise, and your survival depends on instincts you haven't developed yet. A sword blade appears next to your head with the kind of proximity that suggests someone just tried to decapitate you but missed by margins that would make precision manufacturing engineers nervous. You respond by jabbing your spear in the general direction the attack came from, and the weapon encounters resistance that could be armor, shield, or human flesh, determining which will have to wait until you're not actively trying to avoid dying. The ground beneath your feet becomes increasingly unstable as blood, mud, and various bodily fluids create a surface that would challenge professional athletes wearing proper footwear. Your medieval boots provide minimal traction, and maintaining balance while fighting for your life requires constant attention to foot placement and weight distribution. Falling down in a medieval battle is usually a death sentence, because getting back up while wearing armor takes time you don't have. Your spear shaft cracks after absorbing impacts that would destroy modern sports equipment, and you suddenly understand why medieval soldiers carried backup weapons. The transition from spear to sword happens automatically, driven by training you barely remember receiving and desperation that overrides conscious thought. The sword feels wrong in your hands after working with the spear, but wrong is better than unarmed. Geoffrey reappears beside you like a blood-covered guardian angel, his own weapons showing evidence of recent use and his face displaying the kind of focused intensity that comes from successfully avoiding death multiple times in rapid succession. Still alive? He shouts over the combat noise, and when you nod, he grins with genuine relief. Excellent. Try to keep it that way for the next bit. The medieval battle continues around you with the inexorable momentum of a natural disaster, and you begin to understand that individual survival depends less on personal skill than on the collective performance of your formation. When your unit maintains cohesion, you live. When formations break down, people die quickly and messily, because isolated medieval warriors are vulnerable medieval warriors. Enemy soldier breaks through your formation's front rank, and suddenly you're facing a man whose only goal is ending your existence as efficiently as possible. His weapons are bloodied, his armor is dented, and his eyes have the focused intensity of someone who's successfully killed people and is prepared to add you to his collection. This is no longer practice, this is the real examination of everything you've learned about staying alive. Your sword work is clumsy compared to his practiced efficiency, But desperation provides motivation that training cannot simulate. Every parry is desperate, every attack is frantic, and every moment stretches like hours while you discover whether your crash course in medieval combat was sufficient to keep you breathing for another few seconds. The engagement ends when Geoffrey's crossbow bolt appears in your opponent's chest with the solid thunk of a carpenter's hammer hitting wood, and the enemy soldier's expression shifts from murderous intent to surprised confusion before he collapses. Medieval teamwork in Action Your Survival depends on your comrades as much as your own abilities. Historians still argue whether medieval battles were actually as chaotic as contemporary accounts suggest. But experiencing the reality firsthand, you understand that organized warfare quickly degenerates into thousands of individual fights happening simultaneously in a space too small to contain them all safely. The larger tactical situation becomes irrelevant when your entire world shrinks to the length of your weapon's reach. The battle's tide is turning, though determining which direction requires information you don't possess from your position in the formation. You can see that some enemy units are falling back, but whether this represents strategic withdrawal or complete collapse is beyond your ability to assess. Medieval soldiers fought with limited information and trusted their commanders to understand the bigger picture. As the immediate combat pressure lessens, you take inventory of your condition and discover that you're still alive, mostly functional, and have apparently contributed to your side's success without getting yourself killed in obviously stupid ways. Geoffrey's assessment is characteristically practical. Well done. You didn't die, you didn't run, and you didn't get anyone else killed. For a first battle, that's actually quite impressive. The battlefield around you is revealing the true cost of medieval warfare as the fighting moves away from your position. The ground is littered with evidence of violence that would challenge modern battlefield medics, and the cries of wounded men create a soundtrack that will probably feature in your nightmares for years to come. The sun hangs low on the horizon like a blood-orange witness to the day's carnage, and you find yourself still breathing, still standing, and still trying to process the fact that you've somehow survived your first medieval battle without becoming a decorative addition to the enemy's weapon collection. Around you, the aftermath of organized violence is revealing itself in ways that no amount of training could have prepared you for, and your mind keeps helpfully pointing out that tomorrow might bring another opportunity to test your rapidly acquired survival skills. Geoffrey appears beside you carrying a water skin that he offers with the reverence usually reserved for religious artifacts. The water tastes like salvation mixed with mud, and you realize that simple survival has transformed basic necessities into precious luxuries. Drink slowly, he advises, watching you gulp the contents with desperate enthusiasm. Your body thinks it's dying, which it nearly was, so don't shock it back to life too quickly. The battlefield stretches around you like a medieval hellscape painted by artists with particularly disturbing imaginations. Bodies lie scattered across ground that's been churned into a mixture of mud, blood, and materials you prefer not to identify. The wounded are crying out in multiple languages, creating a chorus of human suffering that makes the earlier combat noise seem peaceful by comparison. Your armor, which felt impossibly heavy this morning, now feels like it weighs approximately the same as a small building. Every piece of equipment has shifted during the fighting, creating new pressure points and chafing locations that will require attention before they develop into serious problems. Medieval post-battle equipment maintenance is apparently as important as pre-battle preparation, because surviving one fight means preparing for the next one. The victory celebration around you is more subdued than you expected, probably because medieval soldiers understood that winning battles didn't guarantee surviving wars. Men are checking on wounded comrades, gathering equipment from the field, and performing the thousand small tasks that follow organized violence. The atmosphere is relief mixed with exhaustion rather than triumphant joy. You attempt to remove your helmet and discover that your hair is now a sodden mess that has somehow become glued to your scalp with a combination of sweat, blood, and substances you can't identify. The relief of cool air on your face is so intense it's almost spiritual, and you spend several precious moments just breathing air that doesn't taste like your own recycled terror. Jeffrey begins the process of battlefield salvage, explaining that medieval warfare economics required collecting usable equipment from fallen enemies. War is expensive, he says while examining a sword that's been abandoned nearby. Armor costs more than most people earn in years, and weapons represent significant investments. Waste not, want not, especially when you might need these items tomorrow. The medical corps is moving across the battlefield with practiced efficiency, separating the wounded who might survive treatment from those who are beyond help. Medieval battlefield medicine operated on harsh triage principles. Resources went to soldiers who could return to fighting, while those with fatal injuries received spiritual comfort and whatever pain relief was available. The economics of warfare were brutally practical. You discover that your own body has sustained damage that adrenaline had hidden during the fighting. A cut on your sword arm that you don't remember receiving, bruises that feel like someone beat you with clubs, and a general soreness that suggests every muscle in your body has been overworked beyond its design specifications. Medieval combat was a full-contact sport where everyone lost, even the winners. The enemy army is retreating in what appears to be good order, which Jeffrey explains is both good news and bad news. Good news: they're leaving, which means we won. Bad news: they're leaving information, which means they'll probably be back once they've regrouped and resupplied. Medieval wars don't usually end with single battles. They end when one side runs out of money, soldiers, or will to continue. Camp followers are moving across the battlefield like medieval vultures, collecting whatever the soldiers haven't claimed and providing services that range from wound care to spiritual comfort for the dying. These civilians risk their lives following armies, but they also profit from the aftermath of violence in ways that make their dangerous lifestyle economically viable. Your spear, which served you faithfully through the morning's violence, is now a broken stick with metal attachments. Medieval weapons were designed for durability, but the stresses of actual combat destroyed equipment faster than armies could replace it. Learning to fight with damaged or improvised weapons was an essential survival skill that you're apparently going to need. Jeffrey helps you inventory your equipment, checking for damage that could prove fatal in future encounters. Your mail hauberk has several broken rings that need repair. Your sword shows chips along the edge that require attention, and your shield has absorbed enough damage to qualify for replacement if replacement were available. Medieval maintenance schedules were dictated by survival rather than convenience. The psychological aftermath of combat is proving as challenging as the physical damage. Your hands shake when you try to perform simple tasks. Loud noises make you flinch involuntarily, and your mind keeps replaying moments from the battle with the kind of clarity that suggests these memories will be permanent residents in your consciousness. Medieval soldiers didn't have terms for post-traumatic stress, but they certainly experienced the condition. Water procurement becomes critically important as your body attempts to replace fluids lost through sweating, bleeding, and the kind of physical exertion that would challenge modern athletes. The Army's water supplies are contaminated with battlefield runoff, but contaminated water is better than no water when you're experiencing the kind of thirst that makes survival textbooks seem relevant. Food becomes another priority as your body realizes it's been running on adrenaline and terror for several hours without proper nutrition. The prospect of medieval army rations actually seems appealing after spending the day trying not to die, which suggests that combat has seriously altered your standards for acceptable cuisine. Jeffrey produces some dried meat that tastes like leather soaked in salt, and it's the best meal you've ever experienced. The sun continues its descent toward the horizon, and the army begins preparing for another night in the field. Tomorrow might bring another battle, another march, or new challenges that will test your rapidly developing medieval survival skills. The uncertainty is constant, but you're beginning to understand that uncertainty is the normal condition of medieval military life. Jeffrey settles beside you as the camp begins its evening routines, his own equipment showing the day's wear and his face displaying the satisfied exhaustion of someone who's successfully avoided dying for another day. So, he says with characteristic understatement, "How was your first taste of medieval warfare?" You consider the question while watching the sun paint the battlefield in shades of gold and crimson. Your body aches in places you didn't know could ache. Your equipment needs extensive repair, and your mind is processing experiences that will probably influence your dreams for years to come. But you're alive, which in medieval warfare represents success regardless of how it feels. Educational, you reply, which seems like an inadequate description of the day's events but accurately captures the learning experience. Jeffrey laughs, a sound that somehow manages to be both bitter and genuinely amused. That it was, he agrees, settling back against his pack. And tomorrow we'll probably get another lesson, because medieval warfare is the kind of education that continues until you graduate or die trying. He closes his eyes, apparently able to sleep despite the day's violence and tomorrow's uncertainty. Around you, the camp settles into the rhythms of rest and vigilance that keep medieval armies functional. Guards take their positions, weapons are cleaned and prepared, and men try to sleep while remaining ready to fight at a moment's notice. The transition from combat to rest happens with surprising speed, suggesting that medieval soldiers developed the ability to compartmentalize violence in ways that allowed basic human functions to continue. You attempt to sleep despite the soreness, the memories, and the knowledge that tomorrow might bring new challenges to your survival skills. Your medieval military education has covered wake-up calls, food, armor, marching, camp life, medical care, weapons training, and actual combat, but somehow you suspect there are still lessons waiting that you haven't even imagined yet. The stars appear overhead as darkness settles over the battlefield, the same stars that shine on farms and villages where people sleep safely in beds and worry about ordinary problems like weather and taxes instead of whether tomorrow will bring violent death. You're no longer one of those people, now a medieval soldier who's survived his first battle and learned that survival is less about courage and more about endurance, less about individual skill and more about collective cooperation, and less about glory and more about simply making it through each day alive. Jeffrey's breathing settles into the rhythm of sleep, and you close your eyes, letting the exhaustion finally claim you. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, but tonight you're alive, fed, and wrapped in whatever protection your battered equipment can provide. In medieval warfare, that's close enough to victory to count as success. The last thing you hear before sleep takes you is the sound of the night watch changing, the quiet voices of men who understand that vigilance is the price of survival. Your medieval education is complete, but your medieval life is just beginning, and somewhere in the darkness, the future waits with whatever lessons tomorrow might bring. The soft sounds of the sleeping camp fade into the background hum of an army at rest, and you drift toward sleep knowing that you've survived your first day as a medieval soldier, learned more about warfare than any civilian should ever need to know, and somehow managed to avoid becoming a cautionary tale about the dangers of joining armies without proper preparation. In the morning, there will be new challenges, new lessons, and new opportunities to test your survival skills against medieval warfare's endless creativity in finding ways to kill people. But tonight, you're alive, and in a world where that outcome is never guaranteed, being alive at the end of the day represents a victory worth celebrating. Even if the celebration consists of nothing more than falling asleep on the ground while wearing armor and hoping you wake up in the morning. Your dreams, when they come, are filled with the sounds and sights of battle, the weight of armor, and the faces of men who tried to kill you while you tried to stay alive. But even in your dreams, you're still breathing, still fighting, and still learning the endless lessons that medieval warfare teaches to anyone brave enough, or foolish enough, to survive them. Sleep comes finally, heavy and deep, carrying you away from the battlefield and into whatever rest medieval soldiers find between one day's violence and the next morning's challenges. Sweet dreams indeed, filled with the knowledge that you've survived your first day in a medieval battlefield camp. And tomorrow will bring new opportunities to test everything you've learned about staying alive in a world designed to kill you in creative and efficient ways. And so your first day as a medieval soldier comes to its gentle close, the battlefield fading into memory like a particularly vivid nightmare that you somehow survived. The stars above shine down on sleeping warriors, their light soft and eternal, unmarked by the day's violence and tomorrow's uncertainties. Your breathing settles into the rhythm of deep rest, your armor becoming less burden than familiar weight, and your dreams drift toward quieter places where weapons are tools for harvest rather than death. The camp around you breathes with the collective rhythm of 10,000 men finding whatever peace they can between battles, their snores and sighs creating a human lullaby that speaks to survival's simple triumph. Geoffrey sleeps beside you, his weathered face peaceful in rest, and even the sergeant's voices fade to whispers as the night watch takes over the duty of keeping everyone safe until morning. In this moment, suspended between today's violence and tomorrow's unknowns, you rest in the knowledge that you've learned something profound about human endurance, about the strange bonds that form between people who face death together, and about the way ordinary individuals discover extraordinary strength when survival demands it. The medieval world around you is harsh, unforgiving, and brutal, but it's also revealed reserves of courage, humor, and compassion that shine like candles in the darkness. Your breathing deepens, your muscles relax, and the day's lessons settle into memory where they'll wait to guide tomorrow's choices. You've survived your first day in a medieval battlefield camp, learned more about warfare than any peaceful person should ever need to know, and somehow managed to find moments of humanity even in the midst of organized violence. Sleep well, weary warrior, for you've earned this rest through trials that would challenge heroes. And tomorrow's dawn will bring new opportunities to test everything you've learned about staying alive in a world that seems designed to kill you in creative and efficient ways. But tonight, you're safe, you're breathing, and you're wrapped in the strange brotherhood of those who've faced the worst humanity can offer and somehow found the strength to smile about it afterward. The gentle darkness embraces you now, carrying you away from battlefields and armor, from screaming horses and clashing steel, into the quiet places where dreams restore what waking hours destroy. Rest now, for you've earned it through courage you didn't know you possessed, and tomorrow will wait patiently for you to wake and face whatever new adventures medieval life has prepared for those brave enough to survive them.